So with that, that's the high-level overview, and I want to give it over to Gary so he can talk to you about the details.
Thank you, Paula. So when we talk about our budgeting process, it is a very robust process. We go through a very extensive process working across the organization, gathering a number of inputs that go into the budget, or sometimes referred to as our financial plan. We're gathering information about customer growth, prices of fuel. We are gathering operating expenses, what people need for their capital plan, and all of that becomes a part of what we ultimately produce as our financial plan. And we look at that over a 25-year period. It's a very extensive process. But we do eventually bring that into a 5-year look, and then even more detail down to a 1-year look at our budget. And that is what we bring forward to the board and request approval each year. When we think about our budget, it really is more than just the capital and O&M budget that we request the board to approve each year. Our budget is much bigger than that. This year in fiscal year 2020, our budget is just under $2.6 billion. The largest portion of that budget is our operating expenses, but there are other components to it. There is the repayment of our debt, often called our debt service. We have to make a payment to the city of San Antonio, and then we finally make a contribution into our repair and replacement account, which we reinvest back into the business to help us go forward. As we think about our budget, it really is important for us to keep in mind that it is a very large budget that brings a tremendous amount of value to the city of San Antonio. At the end of the day, our request of the board is to approve our capital and operating expense budget. The other components of our budget are approved either through various policies that guide the governance of those components of the budget, or they're brought to the board for approval at other times throughout the year. Some of those might be our fuel purchases, which are governed through our procurement policy. We also have our debt issuances, which the board approves each time we decide that we need to issue new debt. So our request this year for fiscal 2020 of the board is to approve our budget, our capital budget of $765.4 million, and our non-fuel O&M or operating and maintenance expense budget of $673.7 million. So let's talk a little bit about some of those inputs that go into the budget. We start by looking at our customer growth, key component of our revenues. And if you look at our electric customer growth over the last few years, we have had very steady customer growth at about 2 to 2.5%. And we're expecting that growth to continue as we look forward into fiscal 2020 and fiscal 2021. During that same time, we have seen that our customers are using less, especially our residential customers. And that's really been a result of the fantastic work that has occurred through our energy efficiency programs, our Save for Tomorrow energy program. We've provided customers rebates and other tools to help them use less energy, and we're seeing that in the results and continue to see our customers being able to use less. When we look at our gas customer growth, again, we see continued growth in the number of customers that we're adding to the system. When we look at the usage by our gas customers, we do see that's primarily driven by weather. In fiscal year 19, we had a peak. It was a cold winter last February and March, if you remember. But this year, as we kind of look forward, we're expecting a more normal winter. And so as a result, we're seeing a slight decrease in the usage of gas by our customers. We put that together. I showed you earlier what we refer to as our uses of revenue, the fact that we use our revenues to pay for our operating expenses, our debt service, to make the payment to the city of San Antonio, and then to put into our repair and replacement. At the same time, we think about the sources of our revenue. And that's what I am reflecting on slide 14. Slide 14 shows that at the end of the day, our uses of revenue must equal our sources of revenue. On the outer band, you see the sources of our revenue. The predominant portion of our revenues comes from our retail electric, but we also have some very strong revenues at 7% from our distribution gas, and at another 6% from our wholesale business, our wholesale electric business, as we sell power into the ERCOT market. Slide 15 takes a look at our sources of revenue over a 5-year period. You can see that, again, our retail electric revenues are a large portion of that. We are seeing a decrease in our wholesale revenues from fiscal 19 into fiscal 20. I think everyone is very aware that we closed the Dealey plant at the end of calendar 2018. One item to note in our revenues is our wholesale revenues and the change from fiscal 19 into fiscal 20. We are seeing lower revenues in our wholesale activity. That is a result of the closure of our Dealey plant. With the closure of that plant, the opportunities to sell into the wholesale market will be lower. We'll have a lower amount of capacity, but we'll still have more capacity than we need to be able to serve our retail load, and our retail customers will be served by our existing plants. Looking at slide 16, our uses of revenue. Most of the uses of revenue are a result of our operating expenses, followed by our debt service and city payment. We're seeing our repair and replacement account additions declining slightly. As Paula noted, we're starting to see some things in our financial metrics that are indicating that pressure on our financials. And the decrease in our remaining deposit into our repair and replacement account from fiscal 19 into fiscal 20 and 21 is one of those signs.
You know, Gary, if I may, I want to make sure that we are able to explain the R&R account is kind of a technical term that we've built and we've had for a very long time. But what it really boils down to is it's our ability to reinvest back in our business. It is the ability to repair and replace our assets. It's a very disciplined way to make sure that we keep money left over and we're always able to refresh the infrastructure that we have, the plants, the big transmission lines, the distribution lines, and all of the additional equipment and assets. We have actually over $11 billion in assets. So the ability for us to have a repair and replacement account and a fund for that is extremely important.
Thank you for that additional context, Paul. I appreciate it. So as we look forward in our presentation and look at our operating and maintenance expenses, we can see our non-fuel operating expense projection I mentioned earlier. We're requesting the board for fiscal 2020 to approve an expense of $673.7 million. You can see that that number is up from $621.6 million in the previous year. And the primary driver for that increase is an increase in our employee benefit expenses, our pension and other post-employment benefit expenses. That's really a function of how well the stock market has done. When the stock market does well, it helps us lower our expense, and the reason that we saw some lower expenses in fiscal 19 compared to fiscal 20 was the performance of the market in calendar 2017. Calendar 2018 has been a more volatile year in the stock market, and we're projecting that the market overall is going to end lower than our projections within our plan projections, our benefit plan projections. That would result in some additional expenses that we're going to have to record in fiscal 2020. That is the primary driver for the increase in our operating and maintenance expenses. Elsewhere across the organization, we have done an outstanding job keeping our expenses in check, and that is reflected in these results.
I would point out, though, you know, one of the things that CPS Energy oftentimes gets questions about are salaries and benefits. And in particular, there are questions about CEO and executive salaries and benefits. That always tends to come up, and we address those questions as best we can. We're a market-based employer, and in fact, from that perspective, we benchmark all of our salaries. What Gary just talked about is not that. That is just the cost associated with our insurance for all of our 3,000 employees. And their pension plans are the primary 99% of those costs that go along with it. Those are important in this industry, and they get paid to all of our wage scale employees. They get paid to all our frontline employees. It's really important in terms of the way that they invest, and they have long-term careers here. But to make that work, we put money in the stock market like every other business. And so when the market is up, it's helpful, but sometimes the market is down. And this year, the market is down. And we will continue to manage it. We have budgeted accordingly, and we will make sure that we get good returns on those investments and manage them well.
Moving forward in our presentation material, the next item that we will be requesting the board to approve is our capital plan for fiscal 2020. And as I mentioned, our capital plan for fiscal 2020 is $765.4 million. And that is also an increase from fiscal year 2019. But there are really just a couple of items, again, that are the key drivers for that increase from year to year. This year, in fiscal year 2020, one of the items that we are expecting to close on is the acquisition of the infrastructure, both the electric and gas infrastructure at Joint Base San Antonio. And that is built into our budget projection, and a primary driver of that increase is those assets. The second item that everybody is aware of is the activity related to our new headquarters. We've built that into this capital plan. Most of that activity is occurring in fiscal 19, this past fiscal year that we just completed, in fiscal 20, and a smaller portion in fiscal 2021. Those two items are the key drivers for the increase in our capital plan. But otherwise, again, our capital plan is flat or very, very close in line with our prior years. As we think about our capital plan, and Paula talked a little earlier about our repair and replacement account and the money that goes into that to help us invest into our infrastructure. But we also have to go out into the market, borrow money to help pay for those capital additions. Those two elements, the money that we borrow and the money that we are able to put into our repair and replacement account, provide the funding for our capital plan. And as we look at paying for our capital assets, we try to keep that mix of how we pay for our assets at about 50% debt and 50% of the cash that we put into the repair and replacement account. And that's extremely important for us. That helps our financial metrics, primarily our debt to capitalization. That is a metric that the rating agencies also are very focused on right now. We have a target of bringing that particular metric below 60%. We are currently projecting to end fiscal year 2019 at 62%. We have a plan over the next few years to target bringing that percentage back down. Slide 20 is a new metric that we have brought in to our analysis. We've always kept an eye on our net income, but this year we are focused on it even more intently. As you can tell, our fiscal year 2019 was an outstanding year. I mentioned the fact that we had dealing and our opportunities to sell into the market and the additional revenues that were provided by those sales. And that's reflected in the net income of $139 million that we're projecting to end the year for fiscal 19. But as Paula noted earlier, it's becoming tougher. With that loss of Dealey and the revenues that we will no longer have from that plant, along with the increase in some of our operating expenses, we talked a bit about our employee benefit expenses, and some other increases as we continue to issue debt and incur increasing interest costs, we're seeing pressure on our net income. And for fiscal year 2020, we're projecting that number at just $2 million. But we're going to be focused, as Paula mentioned, at looking at opportunities to improve that bottom line. And there are many ways that we can do that. as an organization, we still need to be thinking about every dollar that we spend. Every decision that we make has a financial impact. And do we have the opportunity to reduce cost? Do we have the opportunity to delay some of our spend? We'll continue to look at opportunities in the wholesale market to see if there are additional revenues that we can find there. And from a financing perspective, I talked about us issuing debt. We're always going to continue to look at ways to lower interest costs to make sure that we can save money. Our goal as a management team over this next year is to see if we can improve that bottom line by $15 million. Our target is to achieve a net income of $17 million.
So Gary mentions that there's a target of $17 million, but I want to tell you that last year, before we got to the summer, we actually had a low target, and we beat that target based upon the opportunities that we see. If we can beat the $17 million, we're going to work to beat the $17 million. We're not going to rest on our laurels, and we're not going to hold back. I also want to point out that he highlighted that we don't have as much capacity. We have more than enough for our community. We have excess capacity, and that's always helpful. That capacity makes sure that we protect all of you, all of our customers, from spiky and high prices that typically occur in the summer when it's extremely hot, and now sometimes in the winter. So we have enough capacity to keep our costs under control, particularly relative to producing power, but we did reduce some of the total capacity we had when we retired the daily units at the end of the calendar year. We had planned to retire those units. We had the plan since 2011. And while they ran really well last year, they are over 40 years old. And they have emissions issues on them. And in fact, we were challenged because we could not run them for the same time frame in the upcoming fiscal year. They were so old, they needed a tremendous amount of additional repair. And in fact, one unit wasn't even going to be ready to serve during the summer. This is what happens when you have assets over time. You eventually have to repair them. Just like when you have a car, you want to drive that car for as long as you can, but eventually, because of the repairs, you believe and you figure out that it's important to buy a newer car. And so what we're looking at now is we've shut that plant down, we've written it off. It is a non-cash write-off. It is good financial position to write that asset off and make sure that now we look with the flexible path for the new generation opportunities that we have. And with that objective in mind, we're going to be coming forward in the community in the next couple of years to talk about those options. What should they be? Gas, renewables, energy storage, and some new technologies we haven't seen before. We're going to put them in front of you, and we're still going to focus on bringing you value and making sure that we work on affordability along the way.
So as we think about the change in our net income from fiscal year 2019 to 2020, the decrease from $139 million down to $2 million in our projections, there might be a question or two, how could the numbers change that much? And on slide 21, we wanted to provide a glimpse into the key things that were driving that decrease. I talked earlier about our lower wholesale revenues. That in itself resulted in a decrease in our net income of about $70 million. I talked a little bit about the increase in our employee benefit expenses, our pension, and our other post-employment. That was about $50 million. We're seeing increasing interest expense costs. As I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to issue debt. Interest rates, you've seen on the news that the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates, and those increases in interest rates are resulting in additional costs for us. And then finally, our retail revenues last year were very strong as a result of the hot July that we experienced. We're looking forward to this July, and this July and August, the entire summer, we're expecting normal weather. And so as a result, we're not expecting the same level of performance in our retail revenues. Still, we're projecting very strong revenues, and I mentioned earlier, we're projecting that growth, adding new customers, just that we're expecting normal weather this coming year. So all in all, these are the key drivers that are resulting in the change. Paula mentioned the write-off of Dealey. That write-off has allowed us to recognize some lower depreciation expenses. Those expenses did help us in our financials, but as we think forward, we're continuing to see pressure from increasing costs on our financials. Finally, looking at slide 22, these are some of the other financial metrics that we talk with our board each month. We provide our board each month information on how we're doing on our financials. These projections are important. They provide us a barometer of how we expect to end the year. And these are the same financial metrics that the rating agencies look at as they look at our credit ratings. For fiscal year 2020, we are still above our targets for both our adjusted debt service coverage and days cash on hand. I spoke earlier about the challenges that we're seeing with our debt to capitalization being above our target level, where we would like that number below 60%. And we have a plan in place to get there over the next few years. But as we look forward into fiscal 2021, we do see some pressure on some of these metrics. And so finally, I'll close with the request that we'll have of our board on Monday. We will be requesting our board to approve our budget, our O&M budget of $673.7 million and our capital budget of $765.4 million. These budget line items help us continue to maintain top-tier safety, reliability, and environmental performance. They're part of what we need to continue to provide the strong customer service that we're able to provide to the community. And they help us meet community growth. We continue to see that growth, and we want to continue to be able to add the customers and provide that solid, reliable service. At the same time, we are continuing to invest in our infrastructure and modernize our infrastructure. And finally, we want to be sure that we are focused on our financial metrics. We'll be requesting the board to approve our budget for fiscal year 2020 and look forward to another outstanding financial year.
So we hope that this information is helpful to you. Again, we are always searching for ways to be more transparent and provide more vehicles for people to get information about what we're doing. Please know that said, we are working hard for you. Our goal is to make people first, to put you as our customers, as our beacon, to do everything we can correctly, to make sure that we're great citizens, committed citizens to this community, and that our employees are continuing to get better and better every day for you. So, hopefully you enjoyed this presentation, and we will look for more opportunities to share things that are coming up and important in the future. Thank you.